Hey, what's going on here? Who's...
Hello everybody, my name is Glitch and welcome to Five Nights at Freddy's, an indie horror game that admittedly you guys weren't suggesting en masse, but we're gonna do it anyway because it's Halloween and the series turned 10 just this past August. I've been around this indie series since its early years, so I've gotten to see it through all of its ups and downs, which this series has a lot of, in my opinion, but we're gonna see where this first title places on my gaming tier list. Yeah, you heard me. We got a big reveal this time. We got a tier list now. Now you can actually have a visual metric for the stuff I talk about going forward. Pretty convenient, huh? Anyway, I know we're doing back-to-back reviews with this one, but trust me, we'll pay you lore enthusiasts back with some of the stuff that we have planned down the road, especially the Kirby ones. Trust me, I know why you people subscribed. I'm gonna clarify that you absolutely shouldn't expect us to do any lore videos about this franchise in particular, however. I can't understate how iconic it is, just how insane this series' lore is, and I'm not about to sell my soul over it. For now. Side note, this game was a huge turning point for the horror genre at large at the time, so I'm excited to talk about it from a review perspective on the channel. It just really has a deep personal connection to me that I'm really interested in sharing. With that said though, it's time to hold on to your exotic butters, cause we're gonna dive into the horrifyingly hectic horror phenomenon's historical hallmarks with Game & Lore's review of the original Five Nights at Freddy's. I feel like everybody who's heard of Five Nights at Freddy's on a slightly deeper than surface level of exposure has a faint idea of the development history of the first game, so let's go ahead and get on with it. Five Nights at Freddy's is an indie horror title created in Click Team Fusion 2.5 by game developer Scott Cawthon, who, at the time, had several games and films under his belt, be it The Desolate Hope, Chipper & Sons Lumber Company, The Pilgrim's Progress, etc. There's a level of charm in these older projects of Scott's that I don't think receive nearly enough attention as the mascot horror scene's Kickstarter of today does. From quippy dialogue to absolutely insane character design work in some corners, Scott's early works are everything from weird to uncanny, and, while not perfect, they laid the groundwork for Scott's success with the Five Nights at Freddy's series, though what inspired what definitely becomes more obvious the longer the series goes on, with the Desolate Games' sci-fi approach slowly but surely creeping into the series as its dominant character trait over the original inspiration from negative reception of Chipper & Sons. See, Chipper & Sons has a look to it that many would consider to be a bit on the unintentionally unnerving side. Nowadays, I'd say it's honestly not that bad, but the criticism was along the lines of, these things look like creepy animatronics, and, well, Scott eventually responded to those criticisms. There's a multitude of factors outside of those criticisms of Chipper alone that led to the development of Five Nights at Freddy's, however, such as Scott finding himself at a religious low point that would eventually guide him from his career of more Christian-based projects to this new game's conceptualization. Additionally, as stated in the 2018 interview with YouTuber Louis Dawko Dawkins, part of Scott's design process behind Five Nights at Freddy's was to just try and make a little extra money in any attempt to support his family.
But like I said, at the time, you know, I was just trying to, you know, make a bunch of little games to kind of, you know, help support my family. And at the time, I think I was making, you know, slot machine games and just, you know, anything would bring in an extra, you know, $40 or $50 a month.
With all of those factors at play, Scott would pursue the challenge of creating something truly scary and launched a Kickstarter on June 14th, 2014 with a goal of $10,000, and it made absolutely nothing. Unlike other Kickstarter indie sweethearts at the time, such as Shovel Knight and Undertale, which received quite a lot of funds toward their game's development, Five Nights at Freddy's wasn't nearly as lucky. The Kickstarter was promptly shut down in just 3 days, and Scott continued to work on the project undeterred before finally releasing the game on August the 8th, 2014 on Desiree, and the rest is history. FNaF would later release on the PS4, the PS5, the Xbox One, the Xbox Series S, the Xbox Series X, Steam, mobile devices, and the Nintendo Switch over the next 10 years. With that in mind, now that you know where Freddy's came from and just how widespread of a game it is, I think it's time that we step inside for our first week on the job. Hello? Hello, hello? Oh good, it's working. Welcome to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a magical place for kids and grown-ups alike, where fantasy and fun come to life. I am legally required to say that, because the other guy can't exactly come to the phone right now. Five Nights at Freddy's' gameplay features the player working as a night guard for 5 nights, staving off the mechanical monstrosities lurking around the corners after hours, which became a staple to the franchise's identity, even if later entries have delved away from and altered the formula to some capacity over the years since. The gameplay was incredibly unique for the time this game came out, as, up to that point, indie horror games were really starting to seep through the cracks of gaming, and, admittedly, 2014's horror lineup was pretty vacant in hindsight. Just a few years prior, Resident Evil 6, Sonic.exe, SCP Containment Breach, and Slender the 8 Pages all released in 2012, and with the exception of Dead Space 3 in 2013, stupidly notable horror games were few and far between, with a lot of the iconic heavy hitters out of the way before then. Alien isolation aside, FNaF introduced something that was completely unheard of from the genre at large: stillness. See, FNaF bears a resemblance to another one of Scott's older games, Sit and Survive, where the player must sit still and, well, survive. Scott has stated before that Sit and Survive didn't directly inspire FNaF, although his mindset at the time did play a factor, as we mentioned earlier, which Sit and Survive was a part of. Unlike other games in the genre, FNaF forces the player to stay in one place and allow the monsters to approach them. They can only fend off the horror. They can't run and escape from them like other games would allow you to at the time. You know those stories of sleep paralysis demons or shadow people looming over you in the dead of night that you can't budge no matter how hard you try? That's a perfect way to describe this first game's gameplay. The only things you can do in this game are turn on the lights, control the doors to your left and right, and look around the establishment through the camera system via a tablet. This is an incredibly basic gameplay loop that gradually gets more intense as the nights go on through the week. You get thrown into the thick of it right out the gate, but the mechanics are incredibly easy to grasp. There's also a battery system, which they justify in-universe as Fazbear Entertainment being money-hoarding cheapskates, which prevents you from just keeping the doors closed, the tablet up, and the lights on all night long. Ignoring the fact that the power would really be draining from keeping the doors open rather than closed, the battery life is a great natural part of the gameplay that keeps it balanced. On top of being mindful of the animatronics, you have to be equally mindful of how you use your defenses, which I think adds more intensity to your situation. It's also worth mentioning that the deeper into the week you go, the rate you lose power actually does increase, which further adds to the difficulty of later nights in the game. But hey now, stay calm, it's not all bad. I think what really ties this up in a nice little bow is the phone guy, voiced by Scott Cawthon himself, who provides exposition and insight throughout the night. Phone Guy is a former employee of the establishment who recorded some calls for you to listen to throughout the week to gear you up better for the road ahead. You're not going in totally blind unless you mute the poor guy, so I feel he helps to ease the tension of the night ahead. Overall, it's a pretty good mix of gameplay elements. A simple gameplay loop that very naturally evolves without feeling absurdly unfair with its difficulty. Any mechanic you'd use is introduced and addressed within the first night, and the challenge comes from mastering these mechanics while using them intelligently and sparingly, rather than being introduced to a slew of new ones over the course of the week. Overall, pretty solid stuff. This approach to the gameplay will continue for the next couple of entries, but while your basic defenses don't get more difficult to handle, aside from the power drain rate increases, the things that really get more aggressive as the nights go on are the animatronics that you're tasked with watching over. Five Nights at Freddy's' Rogues Gallery is rather straightforward, consisting of the series' 4 most iconic animatronics who need no introduction: Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. According to development comments from Scott during the 2018 interview with Dawko, Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica were natural choices for the premise of this game, but it was Foxy who had the most difficulty finding an identity. Candidates for this 4th slot included a wolf, who we've gotten to see appear in the series in both 2017's The Twisted Ones novel as one of the Twisted animatronics, and again in 2021's Security Breach with Roxanne Wolf, as well as a beaver who, for the longest time, was the primary candidate for this spot. However, Scott felt that this was too on the nose with those initial complaints of chippers that helped bring Five Nights at Freddy's to life to begin with. The beaver would eventually debut in the form of El Chip in later entries in the series, starting with 2017's Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, but at the end of the day, Foxy became the final member of the Fazbear Band. These 4 have incredibly recognizable designs that have become staples to the horror genre at large. I think these designs handle FNaF the best conceptually, since they both are and aren't scary. What I mean is, these are probably the least intimidating and off-putting of the Five Nights at Freddy's lineup of animatronics from a visual standpoint, save for the glam rocks of Security Breach and, I guess, the toys of Five Nights at Freddy's 2. So, these guys being a children's entertainment band is believable, but they can absolutely be scary in the right context, which is exactly what this game provides us with. It's after hours, there's darkness all throughout the establishment, and they're coming to get you to secure your untimely demise. The setting works well with these versions, and I've always felt that these were some of the best designs that the series has had to offer for its animatronics. They're just so pleasing on the eye in their own way. This is especially apparent when these designs were translated to the big screen for the Five Nights at Freddy's movie by Jim Henson's Creature Shop just last year. The animatronics make for a unique set of horror antagonists for a genre that, at the time, was full of freakish creatures, twisted psychopaths, and hordes of the undead. While not as unique a concept now as it was 10 years ago, these 4 remain the cream of the mechanical crop in the genre. Now that I've talked a little bit about their designs, I should probably comment a bit about how these guys work. I won't go into the insane technical specifics of how these characters work, because there are far more informative videos geared towards that anyway already out there. I would personally recommend you check out the Bone Fives' Five Nights at Freddy's Guides videos, as they go in depth on the animatronics AI and the movement opportunity system that the animatronics operate on in order to hunt you down. His videos are brilliant, and I absolutely recommend you check them out if you're interested in learning about how these games work from a technical perspective. In the meantime, I'll give you a surface level breakdown of what these characters do. Bonnie, Chica, and Freddy work similarly to one another with slight mechanical differences. Bonnie heads towards your left door, Chica heads towards your right door, and Freddy slinks through the shadows towards your right door as well, although he's far harder to spot on the camera than the other 2 are because of this. Freddy additionally comes with the benefit of arriving at your left door if you run out of power, in which his face lights up and he begins playing the Toreador March. It really adds to his big bad vibe, especially since he doesn't become active until later in the week compared to everyone else. How long he plays the song for is entirely random, so it really gets under your skin and adds to the suspense because you don't know when he's gonna... What? You thought I was gonna jump scare you? Maybe later. Trust me, I'll get you when you least expect it. Maybe. Foxy is the loose cannon of the 4, as he resides almost exclusively at Pirate's Cove, which is located on camera 1C, and he gradually opens the curtain before he eventually makes a mad dash towards your office's left door. For the longest time, there was a huge misconception regarding how Foxy works, as many people, myself included, thought that Foxy's movements were based on whether the player was looking at Pirate's Cove's camera or not, though in more recent times it's become apparent that as long as you're viewing the cameras in general, regardless of which one specifically, Foxy's movements will remain slowed down. The reason why this is so important is because Foxy is very integral to the balancing of Five Nights at Freddy's 1, which is why I'm giving him the honor of calling him this game's best animatronic. I like Freddy a lot, I really do, especially because he definitely feels like the leader of the 4 with the subtle ways he's handled, but I just think Foxy has to be the one to bear the honor, at least for this game. See, every time Foxy charges your office, assuming you close the door in time, he'll slam into it, which is important since he drains a chunk of power each time he does it, and it progressively drains more power on each of his subsequent attacks. While the power draining is a byproduct of staving off the other animatronics because you're keeping the door closed, and it's entirely random how much power you'll lose because of that movement opportunity system I mentioned earlier, Foxy is actively reducing your power manually, and more of it each time you fail to adhere to his demands. Keeping Foxy in check is absolutely crucial to your survival, so you're going to want to focus on keeping him tucked away in your little hidey hole as much as possible, while also being mindful of the other 3 animatronics. Foxy, at least to me, is the best of the 4 because of these challenges he presents you with, without feeling totally overbearing from a gameplay perspective. Overall, I gotta say, this lineup is pretty great. While they're not the most difficult or the largest lineup to fend off in any of these Five Nights at Freddy's games, these 4 are truly iconic, and I gotta be real, I don't really have any complaints about them. I think they're the GOATs. The premise and story of this first game is really simple and easy to grasp, as Scott has gone on record to detail the exact scope he had in mind when he was making this game.
I definitely knew that the story I was telling in the first game was a small snippet of a larger story. Even if I didn't have all the details of that story fleshed out yet, I knew that the story being told in that game was a smaller part of a whole.
I should briefly clarify that I'll be focusing on the hard facts with this section, so whatever the game provides us with. The reason I'm doing that is because, as we'll see with Five Nights at Freddy's 4 in a hypothetical world where I review that, some things happen later down the road that I'm just not at all inclined to believe were always intended for this game's story. We're just going to look at specifically what the game tells us directly for this section, alright? Alright, good. Let's get to it. The premise of the game is probably the most straightforward of the series. You play as Mike Schmidt, and you work as a night guard at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza for 5 nights. Pretty self-explanatory, and pretty obvious. Why would you want to stay 5 nights at Freddy's, though? In fact, why would you want to stay any more than 2? Surely you can do better than less than minimum wage. Anyway, you just have to watch the establishment for the week as the animatronics progressively get more and more aggressive, trying to get their hands on you so they can stuff you into an empty Freddy costume, which will almost certainly result in death thanks to all the cross beams and whatnot that's inside of it. The reason they're trying to do this is explained by Phone Guy, who clarifies that the animatronics are allowed to go into a free roam mode at night so that their joints don't lock up, since they aren't allowed to roam during the day anymore because of reasons, and since it's after hours, they're not going to recognize you as a person, and instead they'll believe you're a bare endoskeleton that needs to be wearing a costume. I mean, this concept works really well for a horror game, though, of course, there's not really an explanation for why you don't just leave or quit your job, but I imagine it's probably because it's just too risky to do so, and you're genuinely safer staying in the office all night, at least regarding the first issue. Like, this is something a lot of people bring up, but would you want to push your luck like that? I didn't think so. Aside from this, however, there's quite a bit of world building that the game provides us with, such as the prior incidents at Freddy's and other ominous tidbits, including Phone Guy's pre-recorded death. It's all pretty haunting, but we can put some pieces of the lore together courtesy of phone calls and blink and you'll miss it newspaper clippings that can appear on camera 4B in the place of the rules for safety sign. From what we can tell, at some point, a man dressed up in a mascot costume lured 5 kids into a back room to their demise in the late hours of June 26th. From there, the killer was supposedly apprehended the following morning, but the bodies were never found. However, it's pretty easy to deduce where the bodies ended up. Reports claim that the animatronics began to produce a foul odor and blood and mucus were oozing from the eyes and mouths of the animatronics, leading to an uphill battle for Freddy's that led to the establishment beginning to close down years after the tragedy due to how unspeakable and unforgettable the evil that happened there had been. There's also the bite of 87 that led to someone's frontal lobe being removed by an animatronic, but much like the missing children's incident, there's just not much context given to this event in this game, but I honestly think that's great.
What?
It really establishes that Freddy's has a pretty dark past, and it adds to the atmosphere without being too specific. I think not having all the answers is good, at least for this game in the series, especially because it allows the mind to wander and speculate its own narratives about what happened. Sometimes it's scarier when you yourself fill in the blanks. Of course, all of this talk about the missing children's incident does raise some questions, however. For example, if there were 4 animatronics here, but there were 5 missing kids in the incident, and we assume that the 4 animatronics in the establishment were in or possessed by the dead children, given their creepy, childlike laughs and human-like breathing as they lurched towards your office, then where did the 5th child go? Despite being called Five Nights at Freddy's, this game actually lets you play an entire week's worth of nights. Aside from the story mode inclusion of Five Nights, there's an additional harder night called Night 6, which is unlocked after completing your first 5 nights, as well as a custom night option that counts as your Night 7 should you complete Night 6. You can actually earn stars for your main menu screen by completing Nights 5, 6, and 7 respectively. Although you can only receive that 3rd star by completing Custom Night's hardest difficulty, 20-20-20-20 mode. This mode is iconic to the FNaF series, and while this version of this challenge is the easiest one the series has to offer, don't go into that thinking you'll first try it if you don't have a game plan already in place. Beating this challenge is pretty commonplace nowadays, but at the time, it was pretty huge. It still kinda is, at least to me. I do think, however, that while Custom Night is a fun concept in this game, later games in the series handle it much better by giving you multiple preset challenges to tackle through the Custom Night mode. Five Nights at Freddy's 2, Sister Location, and Ultimate Custom Night all include this feature, and while I don't like comparing later games to older titles that I'm reviewing, I can't deny that you're only ever going to really attempt Custom Night for that 20-20-20-20 mode experience anyway. It's a great addition, but ultimately, later games execute and expand the concept a lot better than this first one. Aside from these 3 stars to shoot for in order to 100% the game doesn't have too many features. Later releases included cheats that you can enable, including a radar and infinite power, and sometimes purchasable cosmetics such as plushes of the animatronics for your desk, but other than that, this game's really short. There's not too much substance, and that's fine, honestly. It gets the job done as a horror title, and is something that provides a fun challenge for a while. All in all, I'd say it's kind of like Portal, where the length of the experience isn't the driving appeal factor, it's the quality of the experience that makes this game enjoyable, even after all this time. Five Nights at Freddy's was met with unexpected success, blowing up the YouTube horror Let's Player scene and taking the gaming world by storm. Probably the most iconic of these Let's Play videos includes Markiplier's Warning, Scariest Game in Years video, which comfortably sits at 120 million views. That really puts into perspective just how big and impactful these things can be. I can't lie when I say that I tend to go back and rewatch these older Five Nights at Freddy's videos just because there's something so different and nostalgically memorable about it. I myself did have a nightmare once at the time that wasn't too dissimilar to a night terror incident Scott himself had with the game. I apparently got up in my sleep and locked my bedroom door to keep them out of my room. I specifically remember it being Chica that I was locking the door for, although I only remember doing it in a dream, not actually physically getting up and locking my door in the real world. Being a kid at the time, Five Nights at Freddy's was so scary back then. Nowadays, I don't find it nearly as terrifying as I had once perceived it, but I don't think that reactive change would be fair to rate this game on. It scared me then, and it probably would still spook me now if I hadn't grown familiar and desensitized to its gameplay and concept. This original entry of the series still has a really solid mixture of parts that even Scott has acknowledged is a lightning in a bottle game with properties that likely won't ever be replicated to the degree of this entry. With a unique setting for a horror game, iconic animatronic antagonist, subtle and horrific world-building elements, and a gameplay cycle that remains, at least to me, the best in the series, I'm gonna have to put Five Nights at Freddy's 1 in A tier just below Valve's Portal, which you can check out that review here. It's definitely one of my favorite horror titles, and although this isn't a game I would find myself constantly going back to, I think it does do that original intended job of being something anyone can pick up and play for any amount of time particularly well. My only real criticism is that I wish it had more to offer because, while the game is great, I don't think I could ever consider it an S-tier video game because it's more of a template title for things to come. It's a stage setter, an opening act, and there's nothing wrong with that. It was intentionally designed that way after all, Scott said it himself. I just wish there were more to do beyond those 7 nights, just anything to spice up an already great title. Preset challenges would likely have helped this for me, since that was something I really enjoyed about Portal's post-game content, which I had a lot of the same thoughts on. However, the later games in the series that do preset challenges for their custom night usually have 10 or more animatronics at their beck and call, so this game likely wouldn't have been able to do the challenges anyway. It's complicated, but I do think it's a game that is definitely up there quality-wise. It just would have benefited from just a smidge extra. I can't quite put my finger on it. With my thoughts out of the way, the success of Five Nights at Freddy's would pave the way for a slew of new game entries of all levels of quality, multiple book series, and even a movie adaptation developed by Blumhouse, with the second one currently being worked on and slated for a December 2025 release. Five Nights at Freddy's is available on consoles for $8, Steam for $5, and on mobile for $3, which is the cheapest way you can get this game. I personally own it through the Core Collection that was released on consoles for $40, which comes with the first 5 games in the series at market price for consoles. But if that's not a commitment you want, you definitely have those other accessible options. With that being said, I think that about wraps up our first job under the Fazbear Entertainment mantle. Maybe we'll swing back around to some of the other Freddy's entries down the road, but for now, happy Halloween, and remember, there's so much in store here at Game & Lore.